Mic check, mic check, mic check. Mic 2 check.
Quem vai ser papai?
Menina mulher da pele preta.
Menina mulher da pele.
Essa menina mulher da pele preta, dos olhos azuis, do sorriso branco, não está me deixando dormir sossegado. Será que ela não sabe que eu fico acordado, pensando nela todo dia, toda hora, passando pela minha janela todo dia, toda hora, sabendo que eu fico a olhar com malícia a sua pele preta, com malícia seus olhos azuis, com malícia seu sorriso branco, com malícia seu corpo todo, enfim, com malícia, com malícia. Será que quando eu fico acordado pensando nela, ela pensa um pouco em mim, um pouco em mim, com malícia, um pouco em mim, com malícia, um pouco em mim, com malícia. Essa menina mulher a pele preta não está me deixando dormir sossegado. Será que ela não pensa um pouco em mim, pensa com malícia, com malícia, um pouco em mim, um pouco em mim, um pouco em mim, um pouco em mim, com malícia, um pouco em mim, com malícia, essa menina mulher da pele preta, do sorriso branco, dos olhos azuis, não está me deixando mesmo me sossegado. Será que ela não sabe que ela... Tem quem sim, tem quem não. Quero encontrar a solução. Tem quem sai, tem quem não tem. Tem mais ainda não passou. O amor tem no sofrer bom motivo pra cantar. Cada um tem seu porquê, tem mais um pouco pra contar. O amor tem no sofrer bom motivo pra cantar. Cada um tem seu porquê, tem mais um pouco pra contar. Mariana vai, Juliana vem, Pedro se distrai, Ana sem ninguém. E Holanda faz, Carolina bem, Luciano mais, Vera não convém. Tem quem sim, tem quem não. Quero encontrar a solução. Tem quem sai, tem quem não tem. Tem mais ainda não passou. O amor tem no sofrer um bom motivo pra cantar. Cada um tem seu porquê, tem mais um pouco pra contar. O amor tem no sofrer um bom motivo pra cantar. Cada um tem seu porquê, tem mais um pouco pra contar. Mariana vai, Juliana vem, Pedro se distrai, Ana sem ninguém. E Holanda faz, Carolina bem, Luciano mais, Vera não convém, Paula não convém, Dito não convém, Sônia não convém, Júlio não convém. Mariana vai, Juliana vem, Pedro se distrai, Ana sem ninguém. E Holanda faz, Carolina bem, Luciano mais, Vera não convém, Paula não convém, Dito não convém, Sônia não convém, Júlio não convém, Paula não convém, Dito não convém, Sônia não convém, Júlio não convém.
Na minha cidade do interior, tudo que chegou, chegou de trem. Minha mãe olhava pra estação e vendo viagens dentro de mim, desenhou no ventre mais um irmão. Na minha cidade do interior, pra quem mora lá, o céu é lá. Perto da manhã, na boca do sol, toda a avenida e estação, com medo dos pais ou com solidão. Toda a minha vida eu vi passar
Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco batucando no quintal. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco batucando no quintal. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco batucando no quintal. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco batucando no quintal. Samba blim, blim, blá. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão. Tamanco levanta a poeira do chão.
Tchim, 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 tchim. Faz o tamborim, tchim, tchim, tchim. E o violão faz tchim-dom, batendo igual meu coração, tchim-dom-dom. Tchim, 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 tchim. Faz o tamborim, tchim, tchim, tchim. E o violão faz tchim-dom, batendo igual meu coração. Você gostou quando ouviu meu samba sambô, fez a turma toda gostar do seu jeito bom de gingar, de sambar. Din, 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 din. Faz o tamborim, din, din, din. E o violão faz tindom, batendo igual o meu coração, tindondom. Din, 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 din. Faz o tamborim, din, din, din. E o violão faz tindom, batendo igual o meu coração. Você gostou quando ouviu meu samba sambô, fez a turma toda gostar do seu jeito bom de gingar, de sambar. Você gostou quando ouviu meu samba sambô, fez a turma toda gostar do seu jeito bom de gingar, de sambar. Din, 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 din. Faz o tamborim, sacudim, din. E meu violão faz tindom, batendo igual o meu coração, tindondom. Din, 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 din. Faz o tamborim, sacudim, din. E meu violão faz tindom, batendo igual o meu coração, tindondom, tindondom.
Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodó que atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodó que atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodó que atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com
seus filhos na terra, trazendo o bem e o amor.
Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou.
Pra combater a mandinga, correu a gira, girou. Os males de todo mundo para o espaço levou.
Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou.
Com pensamento em meu pai, nada tenho que temer. Ele só me pede a fé no mundo é poder.
Ele só me pede a fé no mundo é poder. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou.
Hello, 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 hello.
Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou
Oh, okay.
com seu bodoque atirou.
Com pensamento em meu pai, nada tenho que temer. Ele só me pede a fé no mundo
Okay.
é poder. Ele só me pede a fé no mundo é poder.
Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou.
Ok, acabou. Ok, vamos time.
Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou. Ele atirou a flecha com seu bodoque atirou.
Ok, acabou.
Hello. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the People's Forum. Let's clap it up. Just a quick question. Who is here for the first time? Yes, let's clap it up. Welcome to the People's Forum. Tonight, we're gathering for something that is genuinely unique, a special conversation, one that I have the privilege of introducing. So my name very quickly is Lyndon. I work with the People's Forum in their education department, and I'm here today because we are here to have a conversation that sits at the intersection of politics, that sits at the intersection of history, of ideas, and we're here to celebrate the launch of a truly tremendous book, The Story of Capital by David Harvey. So let's give it up. So this is a new book by Professor David Harvey. It was released just a few weeks ago on February 24th. But before we get into the book, I do want to say a couple things about this event and why it matters that this event is happening here. So we at the People's Forum have always centered mass political education and bringing political education to the masses. But the education that we believe in would not be where it is today without David Harvey's contributions. We have had so many times where Professor Harvey has come in and brought his prestigious work. He is a professor in the CUNY Graduate Center, and he's brought his work to our forum, right, to bring to the masses, to bring to everyday working class people, because the ideas are that important and relevant, and because education is not something that should be put into some box or siloed, but should be shared. And that's something that Professor Harvey's work embodies, and something that really embodies the work that we endeavor to do here at the People's Forum. So we're super excited to have him, right? I wasn't there for some of the courses that he's put on now, but I'm super excited to be here for this conversation that we're having today. And I think that few people have embodied the belief in public education more. So I do want to just shout out a couple things that we have here at the People's Forum because of Professor Harvey's contribution. One of them is we have a lending library of thousands of books, and that would not be without the contribution of Professor Harvey. And it's an honor to be able to maintain our lending library, which you'll see around you today. So if we can clap up for that contribution. And it is an honor to be hosting this conversation. So we have the story of capital available. If you've come in through the front door, you'll see that we have 1804 books right up there. And we do have copies of the book, but they have been flying off the shelves. So if you have not grabbed a copy, I really encourage you to do so before the end of the night. Our two guests who are going to be speaking today really don't need much introduction, but I'll do so anyway, because I think that it is important that we really celebrate the achievements of the two people here on stage. First, David Harvey is a distinguished professor of anthropology and geography at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and director of research at the Center for Place, Cultural, and Politics. He's the author of numerous foundational books and is widely recognized as one of the most important scholars in urban geography and political economy of our time. Yeah, that's a big deal. We can clap up for that. He holds honorary doctorates from universities across 7 countries, from Buenos Aires to Uppsala, from Lund to the University of Kent. He has received the Patron's Medal of the Royal Geographical Society, the Vatran Lud International Prize in Geography, and the Anders Retsus Gold Medal. And perhaps most remarkably, he has been teaching Karl Marx's Capital for over 50 years. And in conversation with Professor Harvey tonight is Adam Tooze. Adam Tooze is a professor of history at Columbia University, where he also serves as director of the European Institute. He grew up between England and Germany, studied economics at Cambridge, and completed his PhD at the London School of Economics. Before Columbia, he was at Yale, where he succeeded Paul Kennedy as Director of International Security Studies. Before that, he spent over a decade at Cambridge. Professor Tooze is one of the most widely read historians and one of the most important public intellectuals in understanding how economics, power, and politics intersect. His books include Wages of Destruction, a landmark account of the Nazi economy, Deluge on the remaking of global order after the First World War, and Crashed, his definitive account of the 2008 financial crisis and its aftermath. His work has won the Wolfson Prize, the LA Times History Prize, the Longman History Today Prize, and many others, and has been translated into 11 languages. Yeah. So the story of capital is the culmination of over half a century of teaching and thinking. It is a book written for everyone, not just scholars, not just students, but anyone who wants to understand how the system that shapes our daily lives actually works. In a moment when inequality is deepening, when the contradictions of capital are becoming impossible to ignore, the book arrives exactly as we need it. What we're about to witness is a conversation between two of the sharpest minds thinking about capitalism today. So I will not take any more time from their conversation. Please help me in bringing a warm welcome to David Harvey and Adam Tooze. Thank you.
Well, I guess that, hello, can you hear this? Yeah. Okay, I guess I should start this off a little bit by thanking the People's Forum for hosting this. As a geographer, I'm interested in questions of space, and actually getting a space in a city where you can have a radical conversation is really, really hard. And People's Forum has done a fantastic job of actually doing it. Here we are, right in the center of the beast. And it's so thanks, and I'm delighted that you're still here. And I'm going to thank Adam for agreeing to do this. This is a very special. I don't know him very well. I've not worked with him, but I think this is as they say in Casablanca, there's a nice collaboration. I think that's going to be settled in this, and I think this is very important for me because I work on things in a certain way. He works in a different way, but I think we are both on the same wavelength on many things. So let me first mention that over the last 30 years or more, I've been into something called the Marx Project. And it originated in the middle of the 1990s when Clinton was around and everything. We were also being told that the whole kind of left had disappeared and the communism was dead and Marx was dead, and I was teaching Marx and people were basically saying this is a troglodyte kind of stuff you're doing. So nobody was taking much notice of it, but the other thing that happened was that at the end of the 1990s I moved to New York and there was greeted by a group of graduate students who were very political and started to insist that I put the Marx class, which I had been teaching for some time, online. Initially I objected. I just said nobody'd be interested in that. But fortunately, Chris Caruso, who was here and who actually edited the final part of this book that we were looking at, because I was really caught up in one of those sicknesses that arises to people in the northwest of the United States, and so I was not really able to do it. So I wanted to thank Chris for doing that, and he has a better idea of what's in the book than I do. But the Marx class turned out to be great. Chris and some students filmed it. We put it on the web, and a lot of people have learned their Marx from that. And that got me to the point, but having done volumes 1 and 2, and then a little bit of 3, and then the Grundrisse, and then all those kinds of things, that doing this would create an educational base. But I began to feel very strongly that I needed to bring it together in the sense of actually kind of saying, this is not simply about one volume and what's going in one volume. There's a whole notion of Marx's political economy here, which is radically different from the political economy which is there in the conventional economics departments, and it's completely different. And I needed to say, well, how would this look if imagining a first-year course in Marx's political economy? You need a text of some kind, so our first thought was, could I build a text out of this that would be suitable for that kind of purpose? But it would also be suitable for somebody who didn't know Marx but wanted to know Marx. In other words, it would get the work together so that people could, which meant a lot of time was spent on trying to get the right kind of formulation, how to express things in a way which is clear and obvious. And right throughout this kind of thinking was this idea that I wanted to be as simple as possible, but I didn't want to be simplistic. And that's a very difficult line to, so there were some times when I was falling over one side and another side. But in the end, I think that I've produced a book which I hope will help people understand a completely alternative way of thinking about political economy. compared to what goes on in the contemporary economics departments. I think that we've got a very serious kind of problem on our hands, that we're actually living in a world which is still dominated by Ricardo, and the economists have not yet figured out how to get to Marx's critique of Ricardo as I think, a foundation for Marx's alternative version of political economy. Just to give you an idea of how important this is, Ricardo had a falling rate of profit theory. His theory, however, depended upon the idea that population was growing, demand for foodstuffs was constantly rising, therefore wages would have to rise to deal with the fact that they were running out of cheap food. At the same time, land was becoming scarcer and scarcer. Decent land for growing things was smaller and smaller, and so what you have is an economy in which rent of land, wages are rising, and the two are putting the squeeze on profit rates. So Ricardo said eventually this will get to the point where there will be no profit left, and that will be the end of capitalism. Well, Marx had a falling rate of profit. I'm not going to go into details about that, but his falling rate of profit depends very much upon the idea that capitalists are in competition with each other. It's the coercive laws of competition which forces individual capitalists to adopt new technologies. And because if my technology is better than yours, I can beat you in competition, so therefore there's technological competition. Technological competition means that actually the productivity of labor is increasing. And as the productivity of labor increases, you need less and less labor. So we can envisage a situation of the sort we're now envisaging, where actually labor is going to be, much of it is going to be actually redundant. In fact, it's been fairly redundant for a rather long time. There's just been lots of make-work stuff, what David Graeber called bullshit jobs, which have been created in order to somehow deal with this situation. And by the way, the Silicon Valley crowd is looking at this and saying, my God, who's going to create the demand? Well, we better have a basic minimum wage, and therefore there's a whole sort of politics of that which is working there. But anyway, Marx had this falling rate of profit theory, which is completely different from that of Ricardo. But Ricardo's looked ridiculous by the end of the century, because there was opening up new lands in North America and Eastern Europe and Latin America and so on. And so foodstuffs were coming cheaper, not more expensive. Rent was actually being diminished because of the opening up of lands all over the place. So that the Ricardian story just didn't go anywhere, whereas Marx's story goes very strongly forward. So this idea then that there could be a Marxian political economy which is radically different from the kind of economics you would get in an economics program is something which is actually rather difficult to deal with, because you're not only dealing with the fact that people have some problems about getting into Marx, but in fact Marx's language is a little bit awful. And Joan Robinson, a very interesting economist, very close friend of Keynes, kind of said, the problem with Marx is he's so difficult to understand. So I spend a lot of my time trying to translate Marx's thinking into sort of English language so that people can understand what it is that is going on. Now, my big thing here was then to create a picture of the general circulation of capital. Now, again, it's interesting. Classical economics thinks of capital as a set of assets. There's land, labor, and capital. They're factors of production. and the three factors of production are crucial. And along comes an economist, along comes a capitalist and puts the three factors of production together and makes something into something that's profitable. So that's a general story which you get. For Marx's point, however, this was rather different. We're actually dealing with a competitive society, and a competitive society in which there's certain things which are going to be struggled for amongst the various participants, including labor, including capital, the capitalist as well. So the main point that Marx is working towards is this idea of seeing how the different parts of capital come together and create something. And the definition of capital for Marx is not a bunch of assets, but it's a process. It's a process of circulation. And it's a process of circulation that occurs within what he called a totality. And the totality of a capitalist mode of production has many circulatory processes which need to be analysed separately. And this is, again, a very interesting way of starting to look at the political economy. And if I could have the first slide, it produces... when we get the first slide up. Yeah, now this is Marx's definition of capital. As you can see, it's rather different from the idea of and it's a process, and it's a process that begins at the bottom with money capital, and a capitalist comes along and says, "I have money," uses the money to buy commodities, and the two commodities are particularly labor power and means of production. And then the capitalist takes the means of production and the labor power and takes them into the workplace and produces a commodity, and the commodity has a certain value and a certain surplus value which is created in the production process, and out of that comes a new commodity, which is then going to be sold into society. And there are three kinds of commodities: wage goods, luxuries, means of production. And then it's sold, and the result is that there's a realization of the value in all of this in money terms. So the money form then comes in, and effective demand is going to be there to take up. So the realization of value is the end of this. Then the value is then actually distributed amongst various factions of capital. Some of it goes in the form of wages, some of it goes in the form of rents, some of it goes in industrial profit, some of it's merchant profit, and some of it is interest, some of it is taken out as taxes, and out of this, a lot of this ends up in the state, so there's a state finance nexus there, which, and then that money is used by those different categories either to keep themselves alive or is reinvested, so it flows back in to form the money capital. So this is a definition of capital. And you can kind of think of it and say, well, this is too complicated for me. But the analogy I use is saying this is a bit like a human body. A human body can be seen, and I can say, as a totality. But there are many different processes occurring. There are many different circulations going on. The heart pushes the blood around. Oxygen comes from the lungs. Gastroenterologists fiddle with your stomach and all that kind of thing. So what you've got is a human body which is full of many circulating processes. And I wanted to say straight away that any one of these processes stops, then the body dies. And if any one of these points has a blockage, then capital will die. So keeping all of them there, and they're all relating to each other, and in exactly the way in the human body, the heart is dependent upon is codependent upon the lungs, and the lungs codependent on the stomach, and so on. In the same way, all of these elements are codependent upon each other, and they're part and parcel of this totality. So this is Marx's definition of capital, and it's radically different from the economist's definition, and that leads, then to a different kind of analysis as to what might go wrong. I have an argument within Marxism about, there are some Marxists who say there's only one form of crisis in this system, and my answer to that is no. There's multiple locuses of crisis. It can occur anywhere. The only point is, if it occurs somewhere, does it lead the other elements to adapt, to calm the crisis, or does it actually pyramid away into major crises throughout the system? In other words, you can start to analyze what is going on in our own society right now with a system like this and start to ask questions. And I would like to suggest that when we're thinking theoretically about problems, the thinking theoretically is very much about asking questions. It's not about finding solutions. It doesn't tell you, the theory doesn't tell you the answer, but it tells you where to go to look for where problems might arise. So at this point, I think I'll take over and get you.
Could I ask you a question about this? Because if you were trained in a standard macroeconomics course today, or at least of a Keynesian variety, you get shown a diagram that looks an awful lot like this, which is the circular flow demand of aggregate demand. And historically, of course, it's true that Keynesianism is belated in the sense that late Marx is actually closer to the source of CUNY and the late 18th century circular flow thinkers. But how far do you think that this a highly plausible account of the dynamic of capital actually, can make friends, shall we say, with a left Keynesian interpretation of macroeconomic logic? You said that you have arguments within Marxism about the priority of different elements. In some senses, it would strike me that a left Keynesian might be more Catholic and sort of open-minded with regard to where the crisis could arise. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question, and I depended very much on the work of Joan Robinson, who was very close to Keynes and wrote a very nice book about Marxist, her interpretation of Marxism, and obviously the dialogue between Marx and her version of the dialogue between Marx and Keynes is very important in this kind of thing. Marx, of course, was devising all of this well before Keynes came along. So the big question was, why didn't Keynes actually follow Joan Robinson and actually spend a little bit more time with Marx? In fact, Keynes just spent a lot of his time saying, I am averse to Marxism, and he refused.
Yeah, no,
which has
he
a
was
lot to do.
quite Philistine on Marx, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But I mean, Koletsky, I guess, would fit very closely into this, because in Koletsky you even have the division between capital and labour. You have a circular flow schema, which is heavily structured along the class lines that you have here.
Yes.
I mean, in the book, you say something which I think is really, I thought was really profound, which is that, because the one difficulty with a schema like this is it could be a kind of reification, right? This in itself is precisely the kind of reified, equation-based tautology which a Marxism is actually trying to disassemble, criticize, take apart. So I thought one of the really kind of brilliant passages in the book was where you describe this schema as a kind of, it's a heuristic, right? This is to help us think.
Yeah.
But the achievement of this as a balanced flux and flow has to be understood as one moment in the complex process of capital's self-making, unmaking, remaking, rearticulation, rebalancing. In other words, this is like the Goldilocks moment. When it looks like this and the flow is like this, it's the sweet spot of capital actually achieving a balanced flow of all of these elements against each other. And that's not the norm, right? That's precisely the ideal which conventional economics mistakes for the norm, when in fact it's, you know, once in a blue moon, you actually achieve this kind of balance.
Right. Well, the big problem here is that this is depicted as a cyclical process. And actually, as Marx points out, it's a spiral. And I've tried to get my artistic friends to take this and give me the spiral version, and they can never do it.
Yeah, it would be a kind of ascending spiral,
Because
wouldn't it?
yeah,
Or maybe even
ascending.
chaotic, but
Yeah, it's an evolutionary process. And it has to be a spiral because there has to be more value at the end of the day than there was at the beginning, because that's the only way in which this profit can be integrated into this system, which is one of the ways in which everything goes wrong. Because yes, this if we took it to its ultimate, it would be the equilibrium condition where everything is happy and so on.
yes.
But this is but the processes at work through the coercive laws of competition and all the rest of it are there, which are going to screw it up. One of the issues I take up in the book, which I think is very important, is, you know, the problem with this system is not external problems, it's the internal problems. The internal problems are such that it actually is self-destructive. So there is throughout capitalist history, and I'm going to tread on your toes as a historian, but throughout capitalist history, the big question has been, who is going to save capital from the capitalists? And some people clearly understood that. Keynes, for example, clearly understood that. He was going to have to save capital from the capitalists. Roosevelt similarly made the kind of commentary wants to save capital, probably not from the capitalists, but from the bankers.
Yes.
And that then says that you need a whole arena, and you think of the immense, universities and everything else, really trying to come up with a policy which prevents this system from self-destructing, and all kinds of things that they do actually often make things worse. The one that clearly has been generally making things worse has been austerity. That the idea that somehow or other you have to, tighten your belt and suffer and all that kind of thing. And it's interesting that the periods of very long, drawn-out austerity politics almost invariably end up with fascism, because the state is not a friendly agent in the administration of austerity, and therefore you get the idea that somebody should take over the state and violently do something better. So, but these are just. But the main thing here is that this is a cyclical version of the spiral form, and that therefore there's a tension between the spiral form and profit making and this.
And it's also 2D, isn't it? And that's
Yes.
another thing that strikes me, because when you come to this question of who saves the capitalists from themselves, part of the answer, generally speaking, has always been the state.
Yes.
And the state is in like one little box on the right-hand side here.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's commonly thought of, certainly in the conception of somebody like Keynes, as like hovering over what he would have thought of as civil society, or outside it in some way.
Yeah.
And one of the problems with a 2D representation like this is that it flattens out those geometries that, I mean, these are metaphorical geometries, because of course the state is geographically, literally always inside. It's not literally in outer space, it's inside society. But that capacity for relative autonomy, shall we say, is crucial to this idea, isn't it, of there being a force that can save this self-destructive logic from itself in some way.
And one of the things that the self-destructive logic is about is actually trying to figure out, if you like, where's the spigot in this system that can somehow or other be turned on or off. And a lot of that has ended up being, of course, in the financial arena, right, and began to be that way very much in the 1930s. But more and more it's got to the point now where it's almost entirely, and that is then supposed to be the regulator, but it can't regulate because it can turn on the spigot and maybe nothing's there.
Yes.
And that then gets you into some of the other categories that we're talking.
And I know a Marxist state theorist like Bob Jessup would say that the fact that that is the spigot is, of course, not accidental, right? There's a structural selectivity within the structure of the state with regard to which instruments are at work. You could, for instance, do a giant consumer subsidy. Barack Obama could have handed out cash to hard-pressed homeowners. Instead, you end up giving money to Wall Street because you're going to save Main Street by means of saving Wall Street, is the logic. So there is a politics, a power politics, which is either very direct or rather abstract, that regulates which one of the instruments of the state actually are put to work. And again, there's a crazy dysfunctionality to it, right? Because as you say, using the central bank spigot is not the most obvious way of actually engendering economic growth. Like Keynes said, it's a little bit like giving a dog. It's a little bit like giving a. David, somebody is calling you.
That's my.
So there's even this perversity. You know, capitalism needs to be saved from itself, even at the moment that it's saving itself from it, so on. Just by the way, folks, the way this is going to work is David and I are going to enjoy this conversation up here for another 20, 30 minutes or so, and then we'll begin looking for questions from you. So start cooking those up, making mental notes, and then we'll open up to the round in just a second. You jokingly, referred to trespassing on my train as a historian. But I'm kind of curious why you called it the story of capital and not a history of capital, or the story of capital and not the story of capitalism. I mean, maybe this is a bit nitpicking and fussy about titles, but there's often quite a lot packed into that. And I'd be kind of curious to know what your rationale is here.
Interestingly, I cannot find anywhere in Marx's work where he refers to capitalism.
Yeah. That's an interesting fact, isn't it?
Yeah. And he always talks about capital's mode of production.
Yeah.
And that is the mode of production which I'm focusing on, and the mode of production which, for me, is, if you like, the real object of inquiry, with all of the contextual conditions which have to be taken on. And the thing about it is that when you move from the cyclical form to the spiral form, you really face the question, which Joan Robinson took from Rosa Luxemburg into that group of people who were writing about that in the 1930s, 1940s. The problem is that where is the effective demand going to come from?
Mm-hmm.
That's effectively wiped out by Ricardo, because Ricardo adopted something called Say's law, which is that supply always creates its own demand, which is an incredibly tautological formulation. But what happens is that the only way in which this system has survived in a spiral form has been by an increasing dependency upon financial capital, the creation of financial capital. If you look back since 1980 and ask how many crises were there? Local crises like Southeast Asia and so on. And what were they about? Almost all of them had a very strong financial component. And the response of the authorities is, and it's not only the state. I mean, it's also academics, and it's everybody. The response is to throw money at it.
Yeah.
And the result is that we've had, in effect, since around 1980, a whole series of Ponzi schemes, including, it seems to me, a massive Ponzi scheme, which is the whole system, is basically depending upon the creation of new money to absorb the last batch of money that got absorbed. So it's what Hegel referred to as a bad infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you ask yourself, so what is the form of capital? You see, the form of capital here varies. To some point, it's money. Sometimes it's commodities. Sometimes it's productive activity. Sometimes it's in pockets of rentiers and all the rest of it. So there are all these different forms. But the only form that can expand without limit, the only form that can actually satisfy the requirement of accumulation for accumulation's sake, is the money form. I mean, Imelda Marcos had, 6,000 pairs of shoes? We can't accumulate infinitely. But with money, it's just numbers. And you can just keep on going and keep on going. And we have got some extraordinary numbers. I mean, when I was a kid, being a millionaire was something that was dramatic. You know, we've got billionaires and trillionaires now. I mean, the whole system has and one of the things that is an important part of the argument here is that we should pay much more attention to the rising mass.
Yes.
Which is something which Keynes was dealing with, and so on. But right now, people want to talk about falling rate of profit and so on, and I say, well, you can't get to things like global warming from the global, but from the mass, you can get to that, and that is one of the things which is with us right now, and the mass of value. I mean, 3% growth. The total value of goods and services in 1950 was something like $9 trillion, and it's now over $100 trillion. And you kind of go, another 50 years of this, what a mass will be there. And it's not surprising to me that anything that challenges the increasing mass, like trying to actually deal with climate change without stopping the mass. Every time we try to do something about climate change, the mass takes over, and the pressures coming from the need to increase the mass through everything from quantitative easing to simply local sort of lending in your pawn shops. This is the sort of world which capital has moved into because it has not been able to escape from that spiral form of this version in which capital is actually threatening its own existence.
So where do you stand on the whole question of degrowth? Because they would seem to be a group that explicitly address the question of mass. I thought that chapter on mass was particularly good. I love that because that cuts through the ever expanding, inflating balance sheets to what is printed in rather small letters here, which is labour power, means of production.
Yes.
But I mean, the degrowth folks, for better and for worse, target that question specifically, right? They say the fundamental challenge here is to address the excessive growth of the mass.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, what I want to do is I would hope this text would be used as a basis for degrowth, because a lot of the degrowth tends to be a moral question as opposed to a technical kind of so if I can make it a technical question, I'll have done something.
Oh, I thought you were going to say make it a political economy question. Because one of the things I always find as a real struggle with the degrowthers is, what is their theory of the state? What is their theory
Yes.
of agency and power?
Yes.
Because one can see the logic, carbon balance, take your pick, any one of
Yes.
those natural
Yes.
limits. Clearly, you need to constrain physical output, but physical output is the product of a set of social relations and power relations.
Right.
And what is your theory of those would seem to me to be the place where a Marxian political economy would really be powerful.
Yeah, I think that merging that into the degrowth movement would be would be part of, you know, the whole question of metabolic relation to nature and
Yes.
so on is pretty fundamental to me anyway.
You do identify that in the kind of the final stages of the book. You say there are three basic crises that we have to come to terms with, which are the relationship between massive inequality, right? That's the first one. The second issue is so that's the second, actually. So the first of these begins with the past 40 years of wage repression. The second issue is the unbelievable concentration of monetized wealth. And the third is this existential
Yes.
crisis of the metabolic relation. Do you have any hope that those will in fact be addressed?
I have some hope that they will be recognized. Whether they will be addressed or not, I'm not quite sure. But I think that one of the problems again is what seems to me to be a lack of a foundational analysis that can actually get us to the point where we can know that in order to deal with this problem of excessive growth, in order to deal with that, we have to actually look very closely at the role of the profit rate in terms of being the major form of economic incentive for all players within the system. But that seems to me not to get addressed in the letter. So part of what I'm interested in will be to try to use this to ask the right questions. The role of theory and so on is not for me about somehow or other finding the answers. The role of theory is that to say to you, well, these are the things you've got to go look at very hard and fast. And I think the whole manner in which capital has been surviving over the last 30 or 40 years is a very special question that needs it should be the centerpiece of our inquiry, but we can't do it with the sort of standard language of the economists or anything else. We need to actually, one of the things I hope to create here is at least one version of an alternative, which will be a political economic alternative that people can utilize to then ask the questions which are relevant to particular problems such as climate change or whatever else is there, and including, of course, the whole question of the levels of inequality which exist in the social order.
To go back, maybe since you opened the door to this issue of the kind of foundational analysis, one of the things I was really struck by in the book, and this obviously is you've defined this field more than anyone else, is the force and the power of your geographic analysis, the spatial differentiation, the contingency, the complexity of the way in which the process of capital self-reproduction unfolds across the world. But as a historian, what I was also struck by was the way in which that necessary, inherent, insistent emphasis on complexity with regard to space was contrasted to a treatment of time that explicitly says time's arrow is simple, time's arrow is linear, time's arrow is the space in which we can conduct the analysis of the mode of production, which is separate from the complexity of the spatial dimension that we have to get to grips with when we're looking at social formations. And as a historian, that's really gave me pause, because I was wondering whether one could write a version of this book, another version of this kind of critical analysis, which differentiated time actually into different phases, different types of temporality, different logics of time, different moments of urgency. For instance, AI, to my mind, the current drive, is incredibly sinister, because those people really believe that AGI, general intelligence, may arrive in a matter of like 18 months to 2 years. And this changes the logic of investment thinking, because it basically means that there is no amount of money that it wouldn't be worth spending right now to achieve dominance in that zone, because the whole future of nothing less than humanity will be decided by the year after next. Now, I'm pretty certain it's bonkers. I can't say I'm 100% certain it's bonkers. I have ex-students who are out there in Stanford telling me, no, it's absolutely real. The future of humanity will be decided in the next 2 years. But in any case, that's a whole different rhythm. Yes. Of capital investment. That's a whole different sense of temporality. It's almost religious. It's almost apocalyptic. It's basically saying stuff that happens 3 years from now just really doesn't matter, because we're in end times. So this is like capitalism with an end times dimension. Totally different from, infrastructural, patient, European pension fund capitalism that wants to, invest in ESG and the energy transition by 2050. Like, if you believe that, then capitalism has a completely different logic. And then there's the dudes, the guys and girls in the, ultra fast trading world, where it's literally how close can you be physically to the server, because it's down to the millisecond of how quickly you place the buy or the sell order. Anyway, the point is simply, I wonder whether one couldn't add another dimension of complexity which would be organized around different types of temporality.
Well, I thought I had dealt a little bit with that by talking about the very immense significance of turnover time.
Yes.
And how different turnover times, in order to be coordinated with each other, required an interest rate. So that the formation of the interest rate
that's literally where it comes in.
is very much part. And I was very much concerned with the speed up and of course Marx argued that socialism is very much about free time. Yeah. And if you ask the question of people, how much free time do you have these days? And the answer is everybody feels incredibly compressed by the speed up of almost everything. And the speed up of turnover times, so that commodities used to be purely things, so like automobiles and things like that. But now the prime form of commodity which expands most is the spectacle, where turnover time of the experience is close to zero. Yeah. So that actually the capitalists are making more money out of selling experiences these days than they are in making things. And then you look at what's happening to the experiential world, and you see the capital colonization of, say, all professional sports, the way in which things like the World Cup and everything have become big capital events, and a Taylor Swift concert and so on. So you get when Debord talked about society of the spectacle, it's really come totally. So selling spectacle, that's all very much about turnover time and acceleration and so on. So I think that maybe I was selling the wrong things by talking all of that and seeming to have a singular notion of temporality and the sort of running beneath it all. But certainly in terms of turnover times and what's meant by longer term investments and so on.
Yeah.
They're all very much in my mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, if they weren't properly put down on paper.
Yeah, no, the capital incorporates history, doesn't it, in that way? And the most extraordinary thing in China right now is that the pace of infrastructure construction there is so rapid that the kind of conventional assumption that infrastructure is slow and takes years and is forever is also being superseded by the fact
Right.
that they can build hundreds of gigawatts of electric capacity in months.
Yes.
So there's a way in which the churn of the infrastructural system is speeding up to such a point that those basic distinctions are breaking down.
Yeah, you've been involved in China a lot. I wonder how you see it in the light of this sort of thing. I mean, I've been wondering about that, and when China erupts into the thing, I think it's very odd that the crisis of 2008 was actually got round by a massive investment in the built environment in China, which then produced a crisis in the development industries in China in 2020, and so that whole kind of again, it's about temporality.
I would have. That was one where I initially made a mental note to say. I mean, I think the truly astonishing thing about the Chinese dynamic is twofold. A, this isn't a real estate speculative bubble of the type that we've known in the West, because it's a level of urbanization drive on a scale that is unprecedented any time in the West. We're talking about the urbanization of hundreds of millions of people and the complete churn of the housing stock in China in the space of less than a generation. So currently, of the habitations occupied by Chinese families today, 85% were built since 1990. So there literally is no old housing stock. And the 2008-9 boom was part of that was largely focused on transport infrastructure rather than housing. But the decision in 2020 to end the construction boom in China was a deliberate decision by the regime. It was not a typical Western housing bubble bursting. It was a managed, deliberate demolition of the privately financed Evergrande and its ilk construction boom in China. So I think it's misleading to represent it as, the logic of capitalist crisis coming to China. This was a construction boom that was deliberately stopped and brought down by the regime. I could put the question back to you. I really don't know, to be honest, what the correct characterization of the political economy of China is. People struggle, maybe something like a party state capitalism, something like that. Chinese New Lefters prefer state party capitalism because they think of the party as having been subsumed by the state. But there are a series of connections there which are just unlike anything we've ever seen in global development before. And it's on such a scale that you have those amazing graphs of Chinese cement production where the US barely figures and the whole graph is dominated by China's increase. So my sense is Western political economy is a preface to what's happening in China, not the model with which we read what's going on in China. So it's really a kind of a new paradigm, really, that clearly makes use of mechanisms of the market, of this kind of circuit. But ultimately, the entire balance sheet of the Chinese financial system was bootstrapped into existence in the late 1990s, right? They set up the state banks and rigged them on both sides.
But the problem is that what they do in their own mode of doing things, and I'm not quite sure how to characterize it either, but what they do has immense consequences for, say, Chilean copper mining.
Absolutely.
And so the rest of the world is
sucked up
into their thing.
Yeah.
And in a sense, I mean, it's important, I think, for everybody to recognize that what's going on in China is absolutely essential to understanding what the future of capital is about, because I think they have more to say than anybody else right now.
Well, from a physical productive point of
Yes.
view, they're in a completely different league, right? I
Yes,
mean,
yeah.
the continued prominence, and this is one of the great asymmetries and sort of maladjustments. I mean, Ken Rogoff now, of all people, like ultra-orthodox Ken Rogoff is on, all over Twitter today saying he thinks the days of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world are numbered, and within 5 years it'll be the RMB, because there is a fundamental discrepancy right now between the dollar-denominated financial system and the physical productive system, which is
Right.
multipolar, but has China as its beating heart
Right.
and its central node. Which is why, for me, the climate dimension is in fact a better way of viewing what's going on than, say, GDP aggregates or something like that, because it's on the climate side that you really see China's dominance. I'm beginning to scan the room for hands
Right.
to see whether we've got questions, because David and I could go on, I'm sure, all night long. Do we have questions? Yes, guy here. Do we have a mic? Maybe just briefly say who you are. So
Hi, I'm Guy here. I'm kidding, I'm John. You brought up Marx and Keynes. In the general theory, Keynes says that effective demand only lived on in the underworld of Marx, which I thought was a fun quote. My actual question is, actually I'm curious what you think a realignment of the financial system with the productive, structure might actually look like. Especially given that the U.S. is such an important source of effective demand for China. So,
David, do you want to?
Yeah.
I mean, we shouldn't exaggerate America's significance as a source of effective demand for China. That's the starting point. It really is an American narcissism that thinks that we actually make the world go round. I mean, obviously the Chinese businesses are better off for having the American export market, but it's not. The main driver of Chinese economic growth over the last 25 to 30 years has been domestic drivers. It's a big economy. That's always true for big economies. Export demand peaked as a share of GDP around 2005 and then dwindles. The trade share by the early 2010s is down to 12, 13% of GDP, and the big drivers are domestic. So I don't see that as being the main issue. I don't necessarily think the financial system has to line up with the physical. I mean, that's one of the beauties of David's great graph, is that it brings out the heterogeneity, right, of the different circuits. And I don't think it's impossible to imagine a world in which, in other words, it's possible to imagine a world in which the financial system operates with Western centers and in essentially dollars, which are largely offshore dollars, whilst the physical productive system largely operates in networks which are Asian centered. I don't think there's a necessity there, but it is a glaring gap right now. If China wanted to, the way to get to a more RMB centered world is a move they're never going to make, which would be to end exchange controls and capital controls. And they're not going to do that for two reasons. They don't want to see, well, they don't know which way it would go, right? One might be a revaluation of the RMB upwards, and the other possibility might be huge capital flight, and they don't want to find out which one of those trends dominates, because that's a live experiment that would be too risky, I think. Do we have other questions? Okay, the woman here with glasses. Sorry, I'm just using generics.
It's okay. A quick question. What are your thoughts on the rise of platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi and its role in this circulation of capital or spiral?
I have no idea.
Same.
I mean, it's really, I mean, there are lots of things being said about all the platforms and so on. All I notice is that every time I turn on my TV, there's another 5 platforms, all of which demand $9 a month payment or something. And I'm not sure where this is going, and I really don't know what artificial intelligence is going to do. I mean, historically, all innovations have ended up screwing labor. And this, you can easily see that can happen in this case. But then there's all sorts of issues. If you decide that everything is going to be done through AIM, then where is the demand going to come from? And that's why Silicon Valley is really very much about universal basic income or something of that kind, because that's the only way they can imagine that they'd end up with a market for their product. So where this, by the way, is a wonderful moment to go back and read Rosa Luxemburg's Accumulation of Capital, and in particular to read the introduction, which is by Joan Robinson, which is precisely about this question of where is the demand coming from and who is going to furbish it. And of course that's what brought Joan Robinson back to saying Marx should negotiate with Keynes. And I think that's a very interesting idea. I don't know how one would go about doing that, but maybe with artificial intelligence we can set up a conversation between the two.
Where was that question coming from? What's your hunch about Polymarket and these kind of things? Why do you think that's an important development?
Well, I think if someone has a coherent answer to this, then that's almost more scary because it's just such a big unknown. And
Polymarket's the betting market, right? Which will offer you odds on virtually anything.
Yes.
And on the face of it, that would just seem like a kind of extension of derivatives contracts of various types, right? To a whole wide array of other dimensions. So like a market fanatic would say, bring it on, the more the better. Because the more markets for contingencies of different types we have, the better. Because they're stabilizing. I'm just devil's advocate, what's it called? Steel Manning here. I'm not even sure. But anyway, why would we think of the poly market as, do you have an idea that it's like particularly subversive or particularly?
Because any idea can become like a trading thing, right? It's a lower barrier to entry.
Right.
And you don't have like copper futures, you have, I don't know.
I guess it's become frictionless. Like before you had to go to Vegas to place bets on things and sport DraftKings and all that. Now it's just, there's no friction. And then enter corruption and all sorts of things that we're kind of getting an early sneak peek of.
Right. So then, okay, that's fascinating. I was just teaching Habermas today. And, it was topical and a lot of those theorists of the early 70s, Daniel Bell as well, right, have this idea that capitalism can only function well with a residue of conservative norms which capitalism itself can't reproduce. And so rules of proprietary and non-corruption and having to go to Vegas to do dirty and sordid things as opposed to doing dirty and sordid things in the comfort of your own living room, like this would seem to fit in that kind of mold, right? That your theory of crisis is that somehow we've become now finally totally disinhibited, and when we've now finally become totally disinhibited, the kind of residual moral norms that actually were holding the ring are gone, and then finally we will see capitalism's truly ugly and grotesque face. There's an element of this in Marx as well, isn't there? When he kind of holds up the conservatives in various ways. He has some sympathy for conservative critics of capitalism.
Yeah, but I'm struck by the fact that Marx argues that the system has to embrace accumulation without limit. And there's a kind of constant probing, it seems to me, to create new markets that can absorb capital doing God knows what to God knows whom and why. So we have what looks like an escape hatch for the limitations which accumulation without limit is encountering. And I think that, if I was working through that, I would want to sort of start to think about, well, where are these blockages? And what might these blockages be about, and how can they be circumvented? The system is doing a very good job, it seems to me, of intuitively coming up with all kinds of things that look like kind of, we've gone to a different kind of economy now than was true maybe 20 or 30 years ago. First off, 20 or 30 years ago, things were more competitive than they are now. I think we're in a position of almost solid monopolization of the key elements in the economy. So in a way, we're back to monopoly capital, although it's very different from the 1960s. But nevertheless, when you look at the tech companies and the monopoly they can, and the role of the mass in creating monopolistic power. I mean, Amazon, which was born around the early 1990s, didn't make a profit for about 8 or 9 years. What it did, however, was to improve its market share, and it was all about market share. And the mass was what was important, not the rate. And so it was when it got massive enough, it could monopolize and start monopoly pricing. So with all kinds of things like this are going on, and you can see that they have something to do with the nature of the system which exists there. But I'm unable to predict what kind of lunacy will come up next. You know, it's having free time is as I mentioned, is a real problem. But then that's partly a self-imposed problem, because most of it now are sort of addicted to Netflix that we can't figure out, you know, what to do with our time if the television goes down. So this is the cultural shift, major cultural shift. It's a major economic shift. And it's not clear exactly where it's going. So this is why I'm so interested of asking, so what are the legitimate questions we can ask about it?
We had some more questions at the back. Yeah, there we go on the edge. Yeah.
Hello. So to go back to what you were saying about how there's the 18 months, 2-year timeline that some very AI sort of focused people think. To your point, maybe that's a bit optimistic. I'm also, or pessimistic. I am also not expecting that to happen in 2 years. But let's say it happens in 5, 10, 15, whatever. I think what I'm curious to hear you all's thoughts on is, do you think that this kind of change and this sort of observation of how precarious a lot of people's states are, even people who didn't necessarily view themselves as precarious, will lead to a large kind of political realignment or sort of a kind of awareness of that? Or do you sort of see basically how that kind of plays out in terms of electoral politics?
I don't know how it's going to, electoral politics, no. I think that what we need to do right now is to sort of educate ourselves into really understanding the dynamics of what's going on around us, so that we can, instead of fantasizing and all the rest of it, get some very clear vision of what the nature of the problem is. I mean, the problem with the system is not too hard to pin down in its ultimate form, which is profit making is at the root of this. And until we move to a system of supply and all of demand and all the rest of it, which eliminates profit making at its root, then we're going to find ourselves in this perpetual motion of trying to find a source of effective demand which is somehow or other effective enough to carry us until the next cycle comes along, and at the same time stop ourselves doing some of the crazier things going on, which includes the fact that when you start to sort of talk about precariousness, how many people in the world right now are living a life in a precariousness? precarity seems to me to be, I mean, a monopolistic power at one end, precarity at the other end. And we're deliberately creating precarity, it seems to me. And of course, war and all of that kind of thing, and what is being done to environments. I mean, the levels of destruction which are occurring are absolutely astonishing. And while I'm not going to attribute them to sort of nasty capitalists who start wars in order to profit from it, and some of that is going on for sure, but what is needed really is an understanding of exactly how it is that these levels of precarity are actually found to be not exactly tolerable, but inevitable, and we are unable to create a global economy which has a sufficient egalitarianism, so that nobody has to live at the precarious levels of existence that much of the world now exhibits.
I mean, for what it's worth, my informant from that scene said that he thought that the debate on the left wing of the Democratic Party going forward is going to revolve fundamentally around two questions. One is the wealth tax proposal of the Sanders type, Sanders, that kind of proposal, which also, of course, is ultimately a proposal that hits at the AI elite, the profiteers of AI. And on the other hand, a question of either UBI, universal basic income, or jobs guarantee. And in the face of the shock that AI looks as though it is menacing us with, entirely unregulated effectively in the United States, entirely driven by the drive for immense profit and this obscene levels of wealth, that those are going to have to be the agenda of a live democratic left politics in the US for the foreseeable future. And his argument is that even if the economics takes a while to shake out, the fact that we are talking about it, the fear factor from AI in and of itself is enough to really drive this to the forefront of the discussion. That may be wishful thinking on his part, that an organization as broken as the Democratic Party, if one can even refer to it as an organization at this point, but that was his bet, these are going to be themes for electoral politics, and they are new and moving at a pace that we haven't seen before. Do we have some more friend at the front here? Here. That's going to go to the guy with the colourful shirt. And then there's another colourful shirt right behind. We can do back to back.
So I have a question which goes back to your earlier discussion on China. I think you both mentioned that for you it's difficult to conceptualize, to put in a conceptual map the contemporary political economy of China. I was thinking about Branko Milanovic, who I think at one point said that there are clear parallels between Chinese political economy today and new economic policy in Leninist Russia, I think 1920s. So and here it would be not so much this quasi-Hegelian vision of the state kind of intervening into the economy from the outside, but more of a social formation which includes in itself capitalist mode of production, but is not exhausted by it and maybe not even dominated. So I was thinking, I just wanted to know what you think about this kind of parallel.
Yeah, well, I think that depends very much on how we're going to situate in the state, and my own view of this is that first off we should stop talking about the state as if it is some coherent entity. There are many aspects of what the state does in, for example, the United States, which it seems to me are purely adjuncts of capital. The Treasury Department, interestingly, the Treasury Department is in alliance with the Federal Reserve, which actually unifies the private sector with the state sector, and between the two, they try to manage the crisis. They're the two big crisis managers which are around, but so far their crisis thinking as far as I can tell, never gets much further than just chucking more money at it. Quantitative easing, get this out. So I don't know about how the money systems work. There are lots of interesting experiments with alternative currencies and local economic trading systems and things of that sort. And I know many people will say, well, that's just small change, and it is small change, but it does seem to me that there may be some features of those, of the learning curve which goes on through alternative currencies and alternative marketing systems that may actually go somewhere. Right now, of course, anything that looks like it's going to succeed immediately gets squashed by political power. That is the big problem. If you had a big shift and the central government itself was actually going to promote cooperative means of production and farm to table kind of economics and so on, if that began to grab hold, then to be sure the monopolists would step in and do it. So this monopoly control is now, seems to me to be, because it's not only monopoly control over what goes on in the market, it's also monopoly control over what is going on in the state. And so the state, in effect, is now being put inside of this form of monopoly control, which is now, it seems to me, a dominant way of doing things. Again, this is a situation which is right now, which is very different from the 1990s, when it seemed to me that it was still the case that there was some sort of tension around the coercive laws of competition and various things of that kind, of the height of neoliberalism, if you want to call it that way, which is then now translated into, as Marx commented, the more competition enters into a situation, the faster you get to monopoly. And I think we've got to monopoly power right now, and we have to be prepared to confront monopoly power, which is very interesting because the anti-monopoly legislation is on the books. It's just never applied.
To come back to the China question, I would take that, the idea that it's useful to think about modern China in terms of the short-lived 1920s Soviet experiment in new economic policy, that broadly speaking was about restabilizing the agrarian situation and allowing medium-sized farmers to produce on the lands which they'd seized from the Russian aristocracy in the course of the revolution, to use that to understand China today. I call that the horseless carriage method. This is like, when cars first came along, people called them horseless carriages, because it's not an entirely false description. A Tesla is a horseless carriage, but obviously that misses the point about a Tesla. And in the same way, I think it wouldn't be entirely unfair to describe the Chinese system today as the NEP, except on a cosmically larger scale, with an entirely different kind of force of accumulation that now dominates the entire world in terms of physical production, right? So this is, for me, a moment where we need to draw a new map which makes sense of the Chinese phenomenon, not try and put the Chinese back into the tiny little experiments that were conducted then. But to the substance of your point, what is the state economy, state business relationship? I think that was quite well put. I would put, though, in the Chinese case, because they have now for 30 years been living with a rampant private accumulative logic side by side with the insistence on one-party rule by the CPC. The central issue is, in fact, the politics of the party itself. So it's not so much just defining the relationship of the party and the state to private capital. It's continuously working on what that relationship is, right? From the Three Represents in the late 1990s to the relentless purging under the name of corruption, which Xi Jinping is carrying out, which I think is absolutely about trying to ensure a relative degree of autonomy for the party-controlled institutions of the Chinese power apparatus, and their weak side is obviously capture by Chinese society, and corruption is your key tool in regulating that and establishing a regime in which no one is ever safe against a corruption allegation. No one can really be sure that they're on the right side of the law, is fundamental to maintaining that autonomy, right? And it's the difference, say, in the way that Putin handled 2008 and the way in which the United States handled 2008, where you're absolutely right. The Treasury-Fed combination is so tight. It literally is the executive committee of the American bourgeoisie that meets in the Treasury Department in the fall of 2008. The CPC under Xi Jinping is running this other line. It's also a party that's 10% of the Chinese population, right? In this room right now, if this was a meeting in China, at least a third of you would be party members. And you would have gotten there by competitive exam, effectively, right? You have to do this process of application. So then it's about essentially kind of running the cadre of society in a relentless process of what the Russians would have called nomenclatura, right? They have basically an HR department for China, for the whole society, which is administered from the top down to the local level. And they are living that experiment of trying to preserve a degree of autonomy. It's a very, I think, unique in history. This is maybe we take one more question. Yeah. There was a yes. There's the colourful shirt behind is the winning. That's for the win.
Hello, Dr. Harvey. Earlier you talked about how austerity was like would exacerbate the problems in this cycle of production and destruction. However, that could also be seen as like a good thing because we want to. This is also a cycle of production and destruction in the same sense. Like a general strike could be good or bad for this thing. So my question is, how should we look at this politically as a thing that we want to destroy or change or replace with something else?
Well, the austerity problem is that I'm not against all forms of austerity. There's a possible ways in which certain parts could be siphoned off, but in general, what it is about actually visiting misery on the mass of the population, nearly always for the benefit of the billionaires or the nomenclature or whatever. So that the austerity is not an austerity that is going to affect the billionaire class. In other words, we haven't come down to that. The austerity is very much about taking a precarious population, which is already close to having its problems, sort of unable to function properly because of deprivation. And in our own case, if we just look at, say, the fact that so many people were thrown off medical health care, this was an austerity measure which doesn't affect the rich folk at all. It affects a very significant group in the population who are already in a situation of dire impoverishment. And so the thing that is so striking to me is how politically people don't seem to take that seriously. I mean, if you take the situation where, say, half of the population of the United States is trying to get by on less than $4,000 a year, something like that, and you kind of said, okay, that's my political constituency. And we're going to change it so that it's no longer 4,000, it's 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. In other words, you overcome wage repression. So in a sense, austerity is the name for social wage repression. So the social wage is repressed. So that's the problem with the austerity, and just the fact that it might affect some more middle class or upper middle class groups in the population. Yes, it may do, but To me, the important thing would be to have a politics of, as you were mentioning, of the anti-wealth politics and visiting austerity upon the billionaire class, and to see how far that gets.
Well, that is a good note to end on.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this conversation, David.
Well,
It's a
thank
real
you
privilege.
very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for being here. And I just wanted to open it up to any final thoughts, comments, ideas that you wanted to leave this amazing group of people with.
David, do you have final words?
No, it was great to get to know you so much. We should do this again. We should plan a few sessions.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So just wanted to make one quick comment then. If we could, I think this has been a really historic conversation. If we could give a round of applause. Also, I think that it's really important that we check out 1804 books. If you haven't yet, get a copy of The Story of Capital by David Harvey. Give it a read. Give it to your friends. Circulate some of these ideas, this thought, this discussion, and let's keep this going. Thank you one more time for you guys for being here, and thank you guys for coming to the People's Forum.
Thank you. Oh, that was a pleasure.